select Grady. I'll make myself the owner. And we can go ahead and create that group. Now that group is creating, but what we can do is once we have that available, so we've got our licensed site demo here. We're going to go ahead and open that. And from here, you see a handful of options, one of which is licenses. So again, this works on dynamic groups too, but we'll go to licenses. And now we can select the assignments we want to put on all of the users that are in this group. So I'll select assignments. For this case, let's pick A5 for faculty. And by default, it's going to go select everything that comes in A5 for faculty. This is the same for A1, A3, etc. I just happen to have A5 in my demo tenant here. But we can go through and say, all right, well, we've got this group of users. We want to assign them A5, but you know what? I'm going to pull out these retired services. And you know what? We really don't want to deploy Skype for Business because we've got everyone using Teams now. So you can select the services you want to have turned on or off right here for the group and save that. And now anyone that's a member of this group will get these licenses with this set of options applied. So it's an easy way to give consistency in your licensing and who has what services and what licenses as appropriate. So, all right, how are we doing on questions? Okay, so let's go back and now let's talk a little bit about single sign-on. I mentioned at the very beginning of this presentation, Microsoft Azure AD is a full-fledged identity provider, and that means third parties, that means custom apps, that means on-prem apps, and of course Microsoft apps too. But it's not just Microsoft apps. It's really open to the world of anything that supports SAML, OAuth, OpenID Connect. You can even publish legacy on-premises applications with a little utility called Azure App Proxy that allows you to publish on-prem apps as if they're cloud apps, and it takes away the VPN requirement. So now you can securely, you can wrap Azure AD security around those on-prem apps, give users access to them, put MFA in front of it, all of that good stuff without requiring VPN. It's pretty cool. But I'm going to start off, let's show you what the experience looks like. So we're logged in with our user Kara here, and this is her experience in the Microsoft My Apps portal. And you notice we've got a handful of apps, of course, all the Microsoft stuff. We've got OneDrive and Excel and OneNote, but you notice there's some third parties in here too. We've got Canvas and Brainstorm and Schoology. It could be Adobe Creative Cloud, it could be Box or Dropbox or Google Drive. And then we have this other guy here, this on-prem DNS filter. So really, this is a perfect example of that Azure App Proxy. I can click that, and it'll launch an on-prem app that's effectively a pretty dumb app. There doesn't support SAML or anything fancy of that nature, but I'm able to securely publish it and get access to an on-prem web app through that app proxy without having to be VPN'd in. But coming back to our app pane, there's a bunch of tabs here at the top. These are all fully customizable. So I've got core apps or school apps or maybe a group of apps specific for a class. You can have different tabs, different categories for different groups of users. So your students, your teachers, your HR representatives, your faculty members, they can all have the experience of apps that are important to them. You can have them create and add apps as needed. You can have them require pre-approval, etc., to have those added in here. So let's hop back to the admin view. And what does that look like to set up? So again, we're back in the Azure Active Directory portal here. And those tabs I was showing you are part of, we're going to go to Enterprise Applications. And the views I was showing you are part of collections. And so those little tabs where we saw core and school and science 101, this is where you create those collections, and you can just create a new collection, demo collection, and give it a description as needed. We can go through, grab the applications that are important for this to be in this category. We'll add those. You can select the owners of that group. You can select the users that see that tab and that group of applications, and then of course review and create so that that gets published to those users that you've set up. Now, enterprise applications, this is great. This is again where you can add in the applications you want to have a single sign-on experience with Azure Active Directory. And it's very simple. So we're just at enterprise applications. I'm going to go to new application. And here we see basically the predefined kind of store apps that are built in. There's close to about 4,000 or so you can just pick from a catalog that are very, very detailed and well documented and how to connect all of those. But again, we support custom apps you've developed. We support apps that support standard SAML authentication, OAuth, and OpenID Connect. And then I'd mentioned the on-prem integration with Azure App Proxy. There's this on-prem application component right here in the bottom left. And that's how you can publish an app using your Azure App Proxy. You can also go here for a little bit more information. But for today, let's go search for an application. We'll grab, let's see, Adobe Creative Cloud. Let's go grab Adobe Creative Cloud from our predefined portal here. And we're going to just give a name. So Adobe Creative Cloud site, and we'll just click create. And so now that is adding that application to Azure Active Directory. I'll let that go in the background. And so now I'm going to go over to, I don't want to wait for it. Cancel. There we go, it added. I was trying to be too quick. So now we can go back to enterprise applications, and now we have Adobe Creative Cloud here and available. And so we can launch that app. We can go start doing things like users and groups. And so you can assign users that have access and can see this app right here from users and groups. You can, of course, also go make it available to everyone. You can turn off user assignment right here under properties if you want it to just be available to everyone. And then visibility here you can also configure as well. But let's go to the next step. Let's go to getting this set up for single sign-on. So there's a single sign-on tab here on the left. And now we're presented with the options that Adobe Creative Cloud supports, one of which is SAML authentication. So to enable this with single sign-on, we'll just grab the SAML section here in the middle. And it's given us just some sample URLs to start off with. But one of the great things is on these apps that we've added that are in the Microsoft catalog, we have extensive documentation. So first thing you should do, go to this configuration guide. And we'll go ahead and click that here. And that configuration guide is a specific tutorial on connecting Azure Active Directory, and in this case with Adobe Creative Cloud. And you can go in, you get step-by-step directions, including the Microsoft screens, how to set up SAML authentication. And then you can go down here and you see even the steps you need to take on the Adobe side on how to set that up. On the left, you see a very extensive list. Basically, pick a letter in the alphabet and expand it. And these are similar documentation on how to set up different apps. So we could go to like G Suite. So here's documentation similarly on how to set up a single sign-on with Google Suite. And so you can scroll down here, get that same level of information, and you notice at the bottom, we even have the Google specific screenshots on how to set this up. So what it looks like is really, you're going to go, there's this Base64 certificate. You'll want to download that. And then you're going to want to make note of these login URLs and logout URLs. And those values are going to be pasted on the single sign-on application you're configuring. So you go to Adobe Creative Cloud and you'd have that information. You'd paste those URLs, upload the certificate, and you'd have single sign-on configured in that scenario. So with that, what does that look like? So I've got a good example I want to show you. We're going to pull up, just for openness sake, we're going to pull up our Google Chrome here, and we're going to log into myapplications.microsoft.com. And we're going to be greeted with our customized sign-in page. So just kind of like we said earlier, this is your customized sign-in page. You can put whatever background and logo and hint here for your username. Now, I'm going to sign in with a user that is a Google user that uses Gmail that's been enabled for Azure Active Directory single sign-on and been protected with security using Microsoft products. So this is kind of indicative of maybe a scenario where you've got a split user base, some Gmail users, some Exchange Online users, but you know what? They really all want to use Teams and come together with a common ground. So we've got a user that's on Gmail, but we've enabled them for Microsoft Teams, as well as a handful of other Microsoft services, just to enable that rich collaboration experience and help them with that learning component. But we're at the same My Apps portal. You see similar tabs based on what this user's been granted access to. And you notice we have Google Suite. So again, we've enabled Google Suite with Azure AD single sign-on. We're using Azure AD conditional access. And I'll show you, we actually have a CASB, a forward proxy in place over G Suite for this user. So we're going to go launch G Suite. And because I am protecting my cloud app here with a CASB solution, that's the Microsoft Cloud App Security is our CASB. So I've wrapped this app with basically a forward proxy so that I can monitor and control sessions. So in this case, we're getting a warning. This is all customizable, but in this case, we just have a quick disclaimer saying, hey, where you're coming from doesn't meet our requirements. We're going to monitor and impose some restrictions here. You can choose to not display this if you want, but we'll go continue to Google Workspace. And now we're going to complete that single sign-on. No additional credentials. We just had our one initial Microsoft authentication. And now we're logged into our Gmail. We can go over here. We can go log into our Google Drive. You have full access to all of those components, just like you would expect, without any other username or password requirements. And you can see all the documents that this person's been working on. So now I talked about that CASB and doing a forward proxy and imposing restrictions. So you notice you can see that's in place by this mcas.ms. So that's showing that in this instance, we have wrapped our CASB around this session because they're not coming from a domain joined machine, or a managed machine. So we're saying, all right, since you're coming from a personal machine, we don't want you to download anything, and we want to monitor you a little closer. So as we're logged into their email, we can go look at a email that Kara received. We can go open this PowerPoint. There's an attachment here. You can interact with this PowerPoint, read it. You can open it in Google Slides if you need to. But because we have a restriction in place, the second I go to download this, we get greeted with, hey, this is blocked. You can't do this because you're not in a safe, secure location. So we've imposed that restriction based on really the risk of the session that this user is coming in with. So very cool functionality, but shows you that single sign-on experience between Azure AD and some of our third-party partners. In addition to with the CASB, probably deeper than we'll go today in this discussion, but these applications in here, when you connect them with a CASB solution like Microsoft Cloud App Security, we can impose data loss prevention. So you can go make sure that the data that's stored in Box or Dropbox or Google Drive meets your school's policies, that you're not storing a bunch of social security numbers or student IDs or credit cards or whatever sensitive data is important to you. You can protect these files even though they're not in a Microsoft environment. So really cool features of Cloud App Security. But that's my plug for that. Let's jump back and show you how we did all this. So let's get out of here. We'll just go back to Azure Active Directory. So we'll start here and show you how we configured a lot of these security components. So I'm going to hop down to the security tab at the bottom. And let's go, let's see. Let's start with conditional access. So conditional access is, think of it sort of like your firewall rules where you can grant or block access based on different criteria, but not restricted to a network. So you're bringing in various components to the identity, who that user is, what kind of device they're on, what location of the world are they coming from, what networks are they coming from, are there anonymous IPs, are they coming from a Tor network, etc. Bringing all that and giving different experiences based on different risk factors. You don't always have to give the same people the same experience from every location. You have control over the experience you want them to have. So one of the common initial rules to create is a blocked locations list. So it's pretty safe to say in education here in the US, there's probably a lot of many countries that have no business ever connecting to your infrastructure. And you know what? If you have people that travel, there's exceptions to all these rules. You can have predefined groups of people that are excluded from any given policy. But it's probably safe to say there you can think of 50 to 100 countries, if not going the other way, where you're just blocking everyone except for a few that you approve of. But our name locations area gives you the ability to create groups of locations, whether it's IPs that you trust that are your network IPs, or it's countries that you trust or don't trust. And so I've created a blocked countries list, and I've actually gone about it the other way, and I've blocked everyone with the exception of a handful of random ones that I've pre-approved as having access. So we got Canada, got United States, Switzerland, whatever's important to you really on who you want to allow versus block. Again, you can do exceptions. So we've created a category for block countries, and it's based on that criteria, the countries I've selected. Now we can use that when we go to conditional access, and let's go create a new policy. And so when you create a new policy in conditional access, you give it a name. We'll do site demo. You can grab the users that you want to assign the policy to. Now, as a best practice, I always recommend you hop right over to the exclude option, go to your users and groups, and I would recommend excluding what I call a break glass account. It's an emergency account. If all else fails and you have locked yourself out, the break glass account is what will allow you access back in to figure out what went wrong and revert that change. A break glass account should be an account that you don't normally log into, something with very complex passwords and something you've set up alerts so that really everyone that needs to know will know when that account logs in. So you're automating the process of alerting when that account is logged in. So we've got our safety net here. Conditional access rules, you can accidentally lock yourself out of your environment. So be cautious, and that's why we start off with an exclude and our break glass account. So as we go to our include, this is who we want the rule to apply to. If you selected all users, you get this little warning here at the bottom saying, hey, don't lock yourself out for all of the reasons I just spent a couple minutes talking about. Again, you can lock yourself out. So be careful with these rules. It's often best to, when you're starting off, select a group of users that you want to specifically have this rule applied to. You can differentiate your guest and external users from your internal users and groups. You can add people individually. You can add groups of people, really what makes sense. And then we also have things like directory roles. So if you want by directory role, maybe you want your authentication admins to always use MFA and have other restrictions. You can put rules based on specific admin roles there. For the purposes of today's discussion, let's just go grab, we'll pick on Jonathan Antonio today, and we'll grab Jonathan and add him to this rule. So this conditional access rule is going to apply to Jonathan. So now we'll go to the next section, cloud apps or actions. Now, similarly to before, you can select all cloud apps. And again, it will give you a little warning saying, hey, be careful. You can lock yourself out if you do this. So be very deliberate in your actions here. More common, you're probably going to use the select apps. And so we can go select an app and we can pick. Here's our Creative Cloud we added earlier. Let's see, I think we had a Google Suite. Let's add our Google Suite. And let's do Exchange Online. Let's just create a rule for those three here. And so we can go ahead and select that. And now we've got a conditional access rule that applies to Jonathan for these three applications. Now we need to figure out what that rule does. What other conditions have to be met for this to trigger? So our conditions here, we've got a handful of categories. So you've got user risk. Really, that is when a user is determined to be risky or not, based on accumulations of behaviors. It could be those leaked credentials. Maybe that user's been found on the dark web. Their password, their password was leaked. It was for sale, and that's going to be configured as a high risk. So you could configure a policy that says, hey, when someone high risk comes in, let's go kick them to self-service password reset automatically. But this is where you can configure on the user risk level. Now, maybe the user is not considered a risky user, but the sign-in might be kind of risky. So maybe user doesn't appear to be compromised, but we just saw a sign-in come in from a VPN or a Tor network. So you want to elevate the risk there. So you could say, all right, well, when we see a medium risk sign-on, they're not compromised yet, but you know what? We're going to prompt them again with MFA. So you could do something of that nature with these settings. Or maybe you say, hey, we're going to let you get to your resource with MFA, but we're not going to let you get to protected documents. So helps you classify when and where and what a user can get to. Device platforms. This helps you with the rules. So if you want to create a rule specifically for your mobile devices, you can have this apply to Android, iOS, and if anyone's still using them out there, your Windows phones, of course. So you can apply these policies specific to certain platforms. Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe you only want it to apply to Windows or only block from specific platforms. You can use that inclusive or exclusive, how you want to set that up. So maybe we create a platform. Actually, I'm going to do it for client apps. We'll leave that blank for now. Locations. So here's where we can select the locations you're allowed or not allowed to connect from. So we'll click configure. You can include any location. All trusted locations would be everything in that named locations before, or you can specify selected locations. So here you might want to include that block country, saying, hey, anyone that's coming in from these countries that I say are blocked, we're going to block this connection. Of course, you could do it the other way around and block everyone with the exclusion of certain IPs or certain countries. So next, you've got your client apps. So we can create our rules specifically to certain client apps, whether it's a browser or it's a mobile app or desktop app, like the Outlook app for iOS and Android, or your Outlook or Teams app on Windows or Mac. You can designate different rules for different types of apps in that capacity. We can also do things with legacy apps. So your Exchange Active Syncs, allowing your email client to be used with like native iOS mail app or not. We have other clients here. This is traditionally seen as IMAP, POP, and SMTP authentication. This also, it's not documented here. This also includes Exchange Web Services. Think of this other client as basic authentication, and that's a whole other conversation, basic auth versus modern auth. Hopefully you're already blocking basic authentication. It's a big security risk to have basic auth enabled. So hopefully you've got things in place to block that today or turned off as much as possible, if not completely. But that's where you would do it here in selecting the different types of apps you want to configure this rule for. And then we have device state. So this is things like all devices, but then you can exclude your hybrid Azure AD join devices or devices that you manage with things like Intune that are marked as compliant. So you'd use this in a scenario where you wanted to say, hey, we want to block all devices from connecting to Outlook unless they're managed by us, us meaning your school. So that's how you would configure that. From here, now we go to the access controls and what you're implementing. So really it's you can have a block rule or a grant access rule. So you might set up a block rule where, hey, you did want to block all those machines except the managed devices. Or you can specifically say, hey, we're going to allow you to access, but we're going to require MFA. So that's where you would configure the MFA option. If anyone out there is still using Duo, you can integrate Duo. I always jokingly say you can even use both and double MFA prompt your users if you really don't like them, but hopefully that's not the case. But the top one here is the Azure multi-factor authentication that you have. You can add in Duo. You can add in terms of use that you want to customize when someone's logging into an app. Or you can require things like them to be hybrid Azure AD joined or coming from an approved client app, etc. Now, taking that one step farther, let's go down to the session control. Now, these session controls are what I showed you. Remember that page that popped up when we first went to our Gmail? That was session controls using conditional access app control. And so we use this policy, and I use the default one. It's just a block downloads policy. And that's what implemented the component that blocked us from downloading that PowerPoint attachment that was in email. So conditional access app control, that's part of the Microsoft CASB, known as Microsoft Cloud App Security. And it's effectively a forward proxy so that you're monitoring and controlling your data, your apps, whether it's Microsoft or Google or Dropbox, any third party there. But that is conditional access. So now these policies, you notice it starts off, by default, it goes to report only mode. I highly recommend you try that. It's really cool. Basically, the report only will allow the policy to be saved. It can be put in place, and it will operate like it was turned on, except it won't take the actions that you set. So if you had a block policy, it won't actually block the user from getting to a resource, but it's going to report back to you what it would have done had it been turned on. This is a great way to give yourself confidence of the rules to make sure that it is operating exactly how you expect it to be operating. So I'm going to close out of here. I'm going to go back to our Azure Active Directory, and let's just go to sign-ins here. And we can go grab a sign-in here. We'll just grab our Google user sign-in from earlier. And there's two tabs on any sign-in part here. So you have conditional access. These are the things that are turned on. So these are the conditional access rules I have and how that result occurred. So was that result applied? Was that rule applied or not applied? The report onlys tab are the conditional access rules that are in report only mode. And so we can see we have blocked locations and some of our self-service password reset requirements. And you can tell right here on the right what it would have done had it been turned on. In this case, none of these conditional access rules were applied. But if it would have worked, it would say applied or success right here. And then you have the confidence that that session is doing what it should do before you ever have to turn anything on. And the nice thing is with conditional access rules, you can scope it to everyone. You can scope it to a per user or by a subset, a group of people. So it gives you a lot of flexibility for testing those policies before you make big changes to the world. But with that, we have 4 minutes left, it looks like. So I think I'm going to wrap up and open the floor if anyone has any questions or anything else I can help answer while we have a couple minutes.
Hey, Sam, I don't see any questions in our Q&A, but for those folks in attendance, if you have any questions, feel free to use your microphone if you like, and yeah, just ask away.
Hi, good afternoon. First of all, thanks for putting this together, Sam. Great job. I really appreciate your time and walking us through all this. Quick question for you, and maybe outside a little bit of scope, so maybe it turns into a question for the team of whether or not this could be an upcoming session. But like when we get into like Intune and app deployment for endpoints, that's something that Microsoft has a capability of, like actually deploying any type of application to the endpoint.
Yeah, certainly. You can do device configuration, device management, all within Intune. Our first session, I don't know if you were able to join, that was with a gentleman named Eric Orman. Eric is our resident Intune specialist. I don't know, Richard, do you know if there's another Intune session coming up or anything that would address that?
Beyond the two that are coming up, so we have, let me see here.
I know I'm doing another one on kind of security.
Yeah.
I don't remember what the fourth one is.
It is Teams 101. So
Teams 101. So Teams 101 will be hosted by Eric Orman. It doesn't sound like Intune's probably his focus, but he is a great resource to talk to on that. And this is Joe, I think, that was asking that question, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
And Glenn, if you want to reach out to Glenn too, Glenn Osako, he was on the call a little earlier. We can always set up a side conversation if you need help with Intune deployment or kind of want to talk through those scenarios a little bit more.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Joe. Thank you. Well, I guess with that, I'll just say thank you all for joining today. I really appreciate everyone's time and listening to me ramble on for an hour. But thank you very much. I appreciate your attendance.
Very well done, Sam. And for those of you in attendance, if you are interested in end user trainings, we do offer our customer success training program as well through our Microsoft stores. And I'll post a link or a PDF of all our class offerings for end users. If you're interested, you can reach out to Tracy.
Awesome. And Sam, just something that occurred to me. When you talked about authentication methods, pass-through, I forgot what the first option was, but like, are there any? I know you mentioned that the first option was the more Microsoft recommendation, but is there an advantage of using the second option versus the first?
So yeah, first option was password hash sync. That's leveraging Azure AD natively to perform the authentication. So there's no on-prem dependencies outside of just your standard synchronization, which doesn't have to be highly available. Pass-through authentication, that's generally used for like regulated industries where there might be some sort of requirement that authentications are performed on-prem. So it's kind of that in-between between password hash and full federated identity. You still have the on-prem dependency because it's authenticating to on-prem AD, but you don't have the heavy lift of deploying federation servers. So I rarely see pass-through auth in education. I see mostly password hash sync. That seems to be the way most customers are going, and then kind of a lot of legacy ADFS that people are generally very eager to get rid of because they're tired of managing it.
Awesome. Okay, that helps. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, with that, hope everyone has a great afternoon. Thank you again for being here. And if there's any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Glenn, and we'll make sure to get you in touch with the right people. I'm happy to answer questions. Have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.